Hello, and welcome to Positive Fandom. I'm your host, Rrr Mmmm, and today we're going to be talking about a documentary that is very special to me. It's called My Name is Paulie Murray, and it's about an incredible person who had such an impact on American history that not many people know about. And today I'm joined by Mikeylito, who happens to be related to Paulie Murray, and we're going to review this documentary together, which is available on Amazon right now. Thank you for joining the show, Mikey.
Well, thank you, RM. I truly appreciate the invitation. Thank you very much.
Well, when you first told me about this documentary and that it would be coming out this summer, I was very excited about it because you had automatically or instantly mentioned to me that you were related to Paulie Murray and you knew her personally. And from the way that you described her, I came to realize that Paulie Murray was no ordinary American. The accomplishments that Murray has done are truly something that you could probably watch several documentaries on. But fortunately, a documentary was made about her life and her contributions to Americans and pretty much our modern way of life that, I was very intrigued by this person being your aunt and you being able to have that personal connection with her. So it really is very special to have you here talking about the review of the documentary itself. And, as I have to say that I loved this documentary and I've watched it several times over and I keep talking about it to friends and family about how extraordinary Paulie Murray was and just to celebrate being able to acknowledge the accomplishments that Paulie Murray has made. And, it also showed me something that, and I hope that going in this direction or going in this trend towards documentary filmmaking, where we're going to see these stories that need to be told because it's an important part of our American history. And so I'm
Very much
hoping
so.
that, that type of a contribution of somebody who, especially, let's say, during the past century, truly was a patriot and someone who, loved our country and respected all peoples. And I think that that's something else that's also very special about Paulie Murray is that when you can't help but compel yourself with the love that Paulie Murray had for just human beings in general. And I think that that's perhaps one of the things that drove Murray to do the things she did. But more importantly, I think it sets such a good example for us as Americans and the types of things that we should be doing, for one another and looking out for one another. So the other thing that I was going to say is, this documentary is very special because it starts out with using Paulie Murray's own words. And actually throughout the entire documentary, we're very lucky because the documentarians chose to use so many fantastic things that Paulie Murray did that can help us understand what her life was like, what the accomplishments that were done, and not only that, just even the legacy that has been left behind. So, and another thing I was going to say is that maybe for many people who might be viewing the documentary, they might be unaware of what life was like in the early part of the last century for African Americans, and especially for African American women. And so I just love how, they recreate that scenario. And it's not just a recreation of the documentarians, but in Paulie's own words, right, Mikey?
Yes, very much so. Aunt Paulie was my brother's sister. Uh, I believe she and he uh, were two out of, I believe, five children. Um, and their mother died uh, very early. Aunt Paulie may have been about 3 years old. My father would have been younger when their mother died, and she was sent to Durham, North Carolina, to live with her aunts, which comes up in the film and is chronicled in Aunt Paulie's first autobiography, which is called "Proud Shoes: The Story of an American Family." Um, and she recorded everything. She had a reel to reel recorder. She got me into reel to reel recording. Um, and she would just, as an author, she would sit down and just record things into her recorder. And in the time, a lot of the time that I spent with her, she had me cutting out newspaper clippings and pasting them into a scrapbook just about events of the day. She was constantly working on things that are going on around the country. And uh, in the documentary that we're talking about, they talk about how she constantly used her typewriter, and she was on her typewriter constantly. Something would happen in the news and what have you, and she would react to it by firing off a letter to the New York Times or some other newspaper, or to some luminary or politician. And you know, the story that the documentary tells is a story that needs to be told in 2021. Uh, there is so much divisiveness in the country at the current time, and as she was growing as an adult, there was a lot going on in the country then, and as a matter of fact, so much of the stuff seems similar when you compare 2021 to stuff that happened in the 1930s and the 1940s. And I made one particular note that that I thought was pretty striking that came up in the film, and uh, all throughout the film, and let me commend the directors Betsy West and Julie Cohen for just doing a fabulous job. I mentioned off air that there really isn't a lot of video archive material to use for Aunt Paulie. She did one interview with Charles Kuralt of CBS News, and unfortunately, I don't know the name of the college student that did the video interview that's at the beginning of the film. As far as I know, and I spent a lot of time with Aunt Paulie in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Um, she didn't do interviews. She didn't do television interviews. She wasn't interested in them. That's something that I particularly asked her about. But the note that I made, in addition to all the different things that Betsy and Julie came up with during the documentary about how far ahead of time she was on everything. 1938, she wrote a letter to FDR because he wouldn't talk publicly about an anti lynching bill. We're now in 2021, 83 years later, 83 years later, and the United States of America still doesn't have a bill that outlaws lynching. So you can file that under the more things change, the more they remain the same. Um, she was a fascinating person to know, and uh, I always credit her along with my own two parents. I was very lucky to have a home with a mother and a father, and my brother and sister. Uh, with along with Aunt Paulie, she was like a third parent to me, and I think I mentioned once before off air that my parents were happy to get rid of a nappy-headed Bazankus uh, every couple of summers and what have you, where she would take me to either the East Village in New York City or her apartment off the campus of Yale University, or another apartment off Boston Common on Beacon Street in Boston. Uh, she took me everywhere and every place, and she exposed a young guy, a young boy from Crown Heights, to so many different experiences that I might not have been exposed to had she not been there. So, uh, in talking about the documentary, normally when I review films, I review them on a 10 scale. Uh, this this documentary rates about a 15 for me, but of course I'm biased, so you know I just hope that everybody, excuse me, uh, as you mentioned, the documentary is on Prime Video, and so it's out there for everyone to see. And there's a lot of people, excuse me, who appear in the film and who don't appear in the film that are still living today. And one of the things, I haven't really talked about it publicly before, but one of the things I would like to see her get is the Presidential Medal of Freedom, because I think that she deserves that honor posthumously.
Hmm.
And our Vice President Kamala Harris followed in her footsteps, whether she talks about it or not. And Representative Eleanor Holmes Norton is someone that I met through Aunt Paulie when Ms. Norton was working at the New York Civil Liberties Union down uh, in the municipal building in Lower Manhattan. So these are people that know what she did, and as I said before, followed in her footsteps. And I'm very happy to see that Ruth Bader Ginsburg gave her credit for the foundation of the work that she did. And it's unfortunate that Justice Thurgood Marshall didn't do the same. But it is what it is.
You make so many good points about Murray's life. And, like you said, she made it a point to speak out against injustice. And it was a very dangerous time to be doing that, especially at that time. And, her engagement was critical in starting conversations about human rights. It was needed. And, perhaps if that engagement hadn't taken place, the United States might be a very different place to live in today.
And I'm so happy that you said what you just said, because it's fundamental to her character. Human rights. Yes, she was interested in civil rights for African Americans, and she definitely was interested in uh, civil rights for women. But she specifically said a number of times during the documentary, it was human rights that she was interested in. And I think we confine ourselves too much to labels, and I'm a member of this group and I'm a member of that group, when we really need to talk about civil rights for individuals, because we are individuals, or every single one of us falls into all kinds of different groups, but we need to be treated fairly and equitably as individuals, uh, among anything else. So I apologize for interrupting.
No, no, it's totally fine. This is what we're here for. We're here to have this discussion about this fantastic documentary, and to talk about the things that we really loved in it, and different things that we noticed and that we feel are incredibly important to talk about. And you mentioned the letters and the ideas, and even some of the people that Murray communicated with. And obviously she's communicated with some of the most important people in the United States at that time. She became, or let's say Eleanor Roosevelt became a great friend to her, and they became friends. And, it wasn't just obviously they were enjoyed each other's company, but it wasn't just about that. Eleanor Roosevelt was the first lady at the time and very influential politically.
Yes.
And I would argue that so was Murray. um, if your friends are, political, the most important woman in the country at the time, then clearly Murray had more influence than was apparent, but we just didn't know about it. And I find it very interesting that Murray had so many of these encounters, so many of these relationships. And this was important because even despite the fact that we didn't know about it at the time, these are the sorts of things that changed our country and changed the law and changed the foundation of how, our justice system is now. So I think it's very important to note that even on what appears to be, it's not a small level, but let's just say something we were unaware of did have an impact.
Right.
And so sometimes, and it's an unfortunate situation that sometimes, and I guess this is the case with Murray and Murray's accomplishments. Sometimes you are making an impact and you are doing changes, but unfortunately you don't get acknowledged for those changes. And and I hate to say that. I mean, I hate that happened at that moment, but now Murray is getting that acknowledgement. And it's so important in the sense of knowing where that idea comes from and why it was important, because for those who are watching, and if you're not familiar with how our laws are made in this country and how court cases are run, even like, let's say, in the appellate level or the higher state courts and in the Supreme Court, a lot of times a document has to be presented to the court and an argument is made based on very important law-based language. And a lot of these documents are created by very gifted, very talented individuals who work in the law. And Paulie Murray was one of those incredibly talented and gifted individuals. Her ideas were not ordinary ideas. They were the kind of ideas that, you would be reading about in school as a required book to learn about how, the system and how the law works, and also how the rights of humans are. So I just wanted to kind of emphasize that a little bit as we were talking about this, because perhaps, if you're watching this and you're unaware of how our system works, a person can present an idea and that idea can help build a case as to why it's important to defend an individual's rights in this country. And time again, we've been seeing Paulie Murray involved in situations like this, not just in court cases for supporting evidence, but also in many of Murray's actions. And I think that that's incredibly important, and also as a professor and as a religious leader. So, the impact to have all of this in your lifetime, to even just have one area of impact, is difficult and impressive and not the easiest thing to do. But let's say, for the purpose of argument's sake, to say that she was able to impact 4 major areas of American life in that way and improve them, I think is just astounding, because to be honest with you, Mikey, I think I would run out of time. I would feel like I didn't have enough time to do everything. But clearly, Murray was guided by, as far as I'm concerned, a higher power, to go down this road and to, systematically look at things and try to get others to understand what the point of view would be like if you were in the same situation, and why that situation was not the right situation. For example, there may be many people watching this documentary who are unaware that at one time, or even now, we already know that our public school systems are not equal.
Right.
And, for the most part are somewhat segregated, but there was a time where the situations were, I would say, were worse than they are today. And, that idea of segregation, where it was legally written into the law that individuals of different colors could not be in the same spaces in the same country, was a devastating law that really just had such an impact on your future as an American. And
A lot of people are becoming familiar with her writings in her 2 autobiographies and her book of poetry, Dark Testament and Other Poems. However, just on the subject that you're talking about, she also wrote uh, a very large volume called States Laws on Race and Color, which is a catalog of all the different race laws around the United States. I believe it was during the 60s. Um, Somebody can write me, and I can give you all the information. Uh, she also, with in her time in her 18 months that she spent in Accra, Ghana, she when she came back to the United States, she wrote another volume on the Constitution of the government of Ghana. So she had wide and varied interest, and she was kind of like a dynamo. I was with her. I mean, I know she relaxed, but there was always work going on. In 1968, when she took me to Machias Bay, Maine, um, we were on an island, a private island that was owned by a friend. It's called Yellowhead Island,
Hmm.
and there was no television. So this self-proclaimed child of television, me, uh, was going a little bit crazy and what have you. But it was fascinating because, let's see, in 1968, I was 15, and yet I was involved in the discussions that she was having with her friends and what have you. And this was at the time that the Democratic National Convention was going on in Chicago, and uh, couldn't watch what was going on, but we heard it on the radio every night, and it was just amazing. And what I didn't know at that time, I was oblivious to it at that time, was uh, she was thinking about writing the second autobiography, which is called "Song in a Weary Throat," and uh, concerned with what she felt she had left undone. Um, and it's hard for me to believe that she left anything undone, because uh, she was just constantly writing letters and uh, working on things throughout her life. She was a founder of the National Organization for Women. She was involved in the organization of the Congress of Racial Equality. We already talked about her legal writings. You know, I feel like a piker comparing myself to her. So I don't know how she could have possibly felt that she left things undone, but she did. Um,
Well, poetry was so important to her, clearly, from the way that she wrote and the passages that she left behind. And I loved hearing so many of them, or reading them, as was the case in this particular documentary, because oftentimes the documentarians chose to put them on the screen. But what were your thoughts on her poetry?
her main poem, uh, Dark Testament, I actually did a recording of, that's at the Schlesinger Library, that I'm going to have to go up and listen to. But I sat down in her apartment at in the East Village with a copy of Quincy Jones's uh, album Gula Matari, which was on A&M Records, and I recorded Dark Testament to that tune, and
Oh,
I was just fascinated by it, and I remember her giving me tips on how to verbalize poetry, because uh, I didn't know what I was doing, and I had to time the meter of my speech to the song, which was pre-recorded. So that wasn't going to change. So I had to meter my speech to what was going on in the recording. But I thought it was the perfect accompaniment to her poetry, and a lot of her poetry I also got exposed to during this documentary, I guess I never really realized that poetry was her first love. I knew that she liked to write, but poetry was the thing that really, I guess, got her juices flowing and what have you. And I like how when she was doing the radio interview during the documentary and she corrected the host, it's like, no, I'm a poet first and all these other things afterwards. So,
Well, it's very interesting, Mikey, that she chose to define herself at the point of that interview as a poet first, and then those other things secondary. And I think it's interesting because it was her use of words that had such an impacting and lasting impact on so many things going forward. And that,
positively and negatively.
yes. But that voice that she had, and that she expressed herself through poetry and through her other writings, clearly indicates, if you were to, let's say, if you and I had the task of sorting through everything, we would realize what vast knowledge and a vast amount of ideas that Paulie had. I think it would truly open our eyes to just an extraordinary person who, perhaps the reason why Paulie was saying, that she had things to finish was because she had so many wonderful ideas, in my opinion,
Right.
that we are benefiting from. And I also enjoyed how she would phrase things to explain to people who may not have been from an oppressed group. And she, did it quite in a dignified fashion, and in a
You,
debate style as well. Uh, and I truly thought that was important, because to show the contradictions in some of
dear
these
Lord.
law, yes, it was important. It was important to acknowledge that, and I think that also shows that she felt she had to produce the proof, so to speak, oftentimes, to support what she was saying. And very often we hear people make comments and they don't have anything to, it's an unfounded comment. There's nothing behind it, or no real depth to it. But that was never a problem with her. And honestly, her poetry was just lovely. It was lovely passages that she made. And I think that if you had an entire book of her poetry, you could sit down underneath a tree and just read it and enjoy the day with these beautiful messages that she has. The other thing I wanted to say is, you mentioned her trip to Ghana, and the documentary did a great job of showing her there in Ghana. And of course, she was there as an instructor, from what
Right.
they showed in the documentary. And it was very interesting because she happened to be in Ghana at a time when there was some sort of political unrest in the country.
They had just gone through independence, and Kwame Nkrumah was elected president of Ghana right at the time that she went over there. So it was 1960 and 1961.
Yes. And
And believe me, this she never. I'm sure she did, but let's see, 1961. I was 8 at the time, so I I doubt whatever conversations that she had about her experiences in Ghana penetrated my mind. So what I saw in the film, I actually learned quite a bit about what she was going through, and it was positively fascinating to me. It was absolutely I always knew that she wrote the book about the Constitution of Ghana, but I never really understood how she got from here to there or there to here or what have you. And then the other thing that you said that I wanted to react to was I'm fascinated by the dichotomy of her personality, because clearly she was a very self-assured person. Uh, one of the things that I do myself is that I have very definite opinions about all manner of things, and I really don't care how other people react to my opinions. And she seemed to have the same personality trait, but yet and still, despite being so self assured, she had this incredible thing where she felt that like she wasn't up to snuff. And you know, looking back on it, I don't really understand that. We've already talked about all the many things that she did and she accomplished, but yet still she always felt that she hadn't done enough or she wasn't good enough or what have you. There's a section in the documentary when she's talking about uh, going into Hunter College, and uh, she was talking about how she had this background as a young person from Durham, North Carolina, and I was fascinated by you couldn't possibly have gotten into Hunter College and not being able to speak well, and yet you thought that you didn't speak well, and it just didn't make sense to me, and I don't think I could be wrong, but I don't think things in the 1940s where people were allowed to progress through school the way they may be allowed to progress through school in the late 20th century and the 21st century that we live to, where people are just promoted and we don't really care what they know or they don't know or what have. I think things were a lot stricter in the 40s than things are today. So the fact that she was so self assured, but yet reluctant to acknowledge how intelligent that she was, it just fascinates me.
Well, that was a very interesting part of the documentary, and I got the indication from she was at that particular point in the documentary, she was verbally describing what had happened,
Hmm.
and from hearing what Murray said, I got the impression that the education or she felt that the education she had prior to that was not the same standards, let's say, as what she was getting at that point.
Right.
And that was the reason why she felt deficient. And from what she indicated in the story, there may have been some truth to that, where she said that the students didn't have, what they needed. And that's why her family chose to bring her to New York, because she said she didn't want to go to a segregated school anymore. That just didn't provide perhaps what she needed. She was a brilliant young woman, is probably a prodigy, you know,
Hmm.
um, if we're going to look at this realistically, um, just someone who has so much intelligence. And she came to realize that she wasn't going to thrive in a school unless it had, the best standards. And, that's something to make you really think about, in the sense of, what about all the other children who were at that school who never got the opportunity to excel to the way they should. So, I thought
Or
that,
the support at home.
or the support at home. And I just really thought that that was interesting. And almost my entire family has gone to schools in New York, and like City University, State University of New York are the schools that a good portion of my family has gone to and still continue to attend. So I'm very familiar with these schools, and I just think it's very interesting, the comparison, because the story starts off where she talks about going down to it might have been Durham again, to visit her aunts for Easter,
Hmm.
and the comparisons and the differences she saw there. And that's something that I think is very important. And of course we were going to get to it, but since I feel like I've segued into it, is the first that Paulie has done that many people are completely unaware of. For example, in this in the first part of the documentary, when they talk about this bus ride that she was on, and how she was clearly discriminated, she and her friend Mac
Right.
were clearly discriminated. These two beautiful women, young women, who are going down to the South, and they're discriminated against. And instead of it being classified as a discrimination case, they decide to reclassify it as a disorderly conduct case, so that the case cannot be tried as like a civil rights case. And
Correct.
so, I thought that that was very interesting in the sense of, we do see things like this today, but that is going to have an impact on cases and whether or not you can say that discrimination took place. Even now, we see in the news where they'll say, we don't know whether we're going to charge this as a hate crime. The last thing that they wanted down there was for someone to say that there was some sort of discrimination. So to keep them clean so they don't have to put up with people criticizing them for their injustice, they changed that. But it was very interesting to see that. And I think that it was important to see it because hearing it from a person versus reading it in a book are two different things. How lucky were we to have her verbally talk about that particular situation, and
Right.
and ironically, how close she came to shaping the law again, um, you know, i- indirectly, more or less. But it's very interesting that she had that particular experience, and that it was could have been for something very critical in adding to the injustices that we've witnessed in the United States. But something else that was very interesting about her is other firsts that she's had. For example, as we mentioned before, the documents that she wrote, her ideas as to
Right.
why people being discriminated against is an injustice, to women, in some cases to African Americans, um, and then it was used in some very important cases. Her idea of that in Ruth Bader Ginsburg's uh, case about, and I can't remember the details of the case that she presented, but the point is that she used some of Pauli Murray's documents and ideas that Pauli Murray wrote in her case when she pled it to the court.
Right.
And so, that was very interesting. And I think that, that entire situation where she also, when she is a professor and she has a situation where she applies for tenure, and upon applying for tenure, she's turned down. And, this, she literally says in the letter, what I'm asking for is equality. And there is no argument against that
And
because,
the reason I was laughing was the response, the first response that she got back, that uh, her writings weren't impactful enough, and I'm going like, "Are you kidding?"
but something, Mikey, the fact that I don't know whether the university knew the impact that she had. Perhaps they did. She mentioned she had an influence in law, and I understand that. But a lot of her work was ignored up until that point.
Right.
And we see that in this documentary. And for example, when she's on campus with all those, young students in the 60s and 70s, um, and there was this situation where she had a certain approach to how things should be handled, and they had a certain approach, and they had this impression that she was out of touch. How differently would they have viewed her had they known the impact that she had on American history? How
It
different would their response have been?
it's funny that you should mention that incident, because I was with her during those times, and some of the discussions that were brought up in the film were conversations that we had had, particularly the use of the word Negro, and its capitalization, and the use of the word Black referring to African Americans. She was hardcore on that. She was absolutely hardcore on that. We went back and forth on it, and to a certain degree, of course, I'm older now. uh, uh, I really do. I did two political satire things around those times. One was about the characterization of the neighborhood of Bedford Stuyvesant, and I actually lived in Crown Heights, but the area of Crown Heights that I lived in was actually the northern part of Crown Heights. But as more and more black people moved into that area, all of a sudden that neighborhood became Bedford Stuyvesant. So I had this cartoon where, and it was like stick figure cartoon, but like Bedford Stuyvesant was this little small circle, and then it got bigger and bigger, and soon it took over all of Brooklyn, and just Bedford Stuyvesant was this huge thing, and what have you. And I don't remember what the other satire was right at the moment, but she she had very definite ideas about things, and I mentioned that as I get older, um, some of my opinions about words and things have changed. I'm getting very attached to the word mulatto right now, and that's because I've had my DNA done. Now, my father was, if people think I'm light skinned, my father was extremely light skinned. He actually could pass for white. And when I had my DNA done, I close to 50% of my DNA comes from uh, the United Kingdom.
Mm.
I have a problem understanding that because my mom, who we know nothing about her background, is from uh, uh, Eastern Tennessee, and she's dark skinned, and I'm going. It doesn't make sense that my DNA is like 50% UK and 50% African, uh, I'm really fascinated by that and what have you. And the word mulatto describes that condition, if you will. And yet, and still, when you look up the word mulatto, it's supposed to be a archaic word. It has a negative connotation. I don't feel it has a negative connotation at all. It is what it is, and it, it's really important, that people not get so hung up on words. But I definitely remember all the controversy that was going on or on about the word Negro and what have you. And also in that section of the film, uh, they talked about when she was at Yale, which was years earlier, and
Yes.
people like Eleanor Holmes Norton and a couple other people that I don't recognize um, talked about how they felt, and this is characteristic of young people, throughout the ages. e- Everything is a fresh thought. One of the big controversies in 2021 is that people think like there's no such thing as history. Everything begins now, and that's what was talked about in the film. Uh, Whereas young black people thought, oh, well, we're the revolutionaries, and have no concept about, forget about what she did, but things like what Rosa Parks and Thurgood Marshall and Ruth Bader Ginsburg and any number of people, Martin Luther King, what they did beforehand. And it's just like, no, it starts with us. And people would do well to study history because it's said as a bromide, but it's true. Those who don't know history are doomed to repeat it. And it seems like we've been repeating it way too often.
Yes, and that you make a lot of good points with that, and I couldn't help but think about how at some point in her life she decided to become a minister, a priest, and she was one of the first female priests, I think, in the Episcopal Church, and how extraordinary to then, after all those accomplishments, to decide to go into the priesthood. um, I think it's just shows so much about how much Murray had and wanted to give to others. Um,
Apparently, that was a response to there's a section late in the film where they talk about her relationship with Rennie Barlow. I knew really Rennie Barlow personally, so I had no idea that that was going on. And just so the audience knows, for those of you who don't know, I'm pretty open about it. I happen to be a gay male, so uh, I had no concept that that relationship was anything other than a friendship. I'm not upset by it. Uh, it doesn't bother me in the least. I had been to Rennie Barlow's apartment. I was around Rennie Barlow, not constantly, but I knew who she was, and I was aware of her. I had no idea that the relationship was as deep as it was. And when Rennie Barlow died, Aunt Paulie started to question all the different things that she had done in life, and that's when she started to decide uh, that she was going to study for the priesthood. You know, it's funny. The family, the family, we were constantly, and I mean, I'm not speaking just for me, but but for the entire family. We were constantly perplexed by uh, just when you think Paulie would attain a certain position that she was trying to attain, all of a sudden she would like switch to switch to something else, and just because I guess she felt like I've done everything that I could do in this section of my life, but this thing over here interests me, and so now I'm going to pursue that. So she was certainly the first African American woman who was uh, accepted for the priesthood in the Episcopal Church, and she also happens to be the first African American female saint in the Episcopal Church.
Well, that's wonderful. I had no idea that she had achieved sainthood, and that certainly is a very special accomplishment as well, and uh, I think well deserved um, for Paulie. And you know, you mentioned the woman who was her friend
Yeah.
in the story, and I did just want to say that I was very impressed with the fact that Murray decided to write down pretty much everything, including her medical history and how she was feeling at the time.
Hmm.
And this became very significant, or becomes very significant, in the sense of talking about her sexuality. And talking about sexuality now is not easy under, let's say, ordinary circumstances. But what makes Paulie so significant in this case is that she actually wrote to doctors about her sexuality.
Right.
And, you know, those writings that she presented to them um, were like almost as if you were saying, you know, the patient presents with symptoms of anxiety, or, you know, whatever the symptoms were. And it was a legitimate inquiry to doctors trying to understand why she felt the way she did. And I think this is really important because a lot of times when you're going to doctors, you know, your concerns and feelings are ignored. And by her documenting how she felt and trying to explain, you know, why do I have these feelings? You know, am I different from what I appear to be? I thought it was really significant because there are other people who have these questions, and now
There's
we have
a
it
no.
documented, you
I'm
know,
sorry.
and I think it's a wonderful thing because, you know, it needed to be documented. We needed to see that there are other people who have these experiences, and you know, it really is fantastic that we can see this now.
It brings up a couple of different things for me. Um, I produce a podcast for a friend of mine, Regina Jones, who does a podcast called Chemo Glow, and we do a live stream usually once a week. We didn't do it this week. Chemo Glow live, and it's about cancer. And one of the things that we talk about often, and I don't have cancer, but I do have medical conditions that have to be managed. It's extremely important for patients to advocate for their care. And clearly, Paulie advocated for her care. Now, the difference between what she went through in the 40s and 50s and what we go through today is she strongly advocated for her care, and it wasn't necessarily listened to, although there was one doctor that did listen to her, found the appendicitis, and uh, proceeded to examine what it was she wanted him to examine, but not to her satisfaction. So
Yes.
I'll just state it that way.
Yes.
Uh,
Yes.
Patients today, I insist that my doctors listen to me, and I let them know that if they don't listen to me, I'm pretty much going to do what I want to do anyway. So you might as well either help me or tell me why my idea is not a good idea, or what have you. So it's very important for patients to advocate for their care. That's number one. Secondly, and perhaps as importantly, it talks about the importance of mental health. And uh, clearly, especially when she found out that she didn't have undescended testes, uh, that must have weighed extremely heavily on her mind because, as you mentioned, uh, sexuality, which is barely talked about today intelligently in the United States,
Mm-hmm.
certainly wasn't talked about in the 40s and 50s, uh, in her time. For the people who are watching this podcast who are interested in entertainment, there was a thing before ratings called the Hayes Code, and you could barely. Well, let's put it this way: anybody that's watched I Love Lucy knows that a married couple couldn't even sleep in the same bed.
That's right.
So where little Ricky came from, hey. So, um, so she must have had a very difficult time reconciling things that were occurring to her that she didn't understand and the medical community could provide no answers for. As a member of her family, I can tell you right now, even after the woman died, people, including me, had difficulty understanding her sexuality. A lot of people uh, refuse to accept it. However, when you read the things that she left behind, it's undeniable. It's absolutely undeniable that she was who she was. And so I have no problem with I don't necessarily, I'll use it one time. I don't use the alphabet soup of LGBTQIA plus. Like, I call it gender and sexual diversity, GSD. I don't have a problem with the GSD community accepting her as an icon. I don't have any problem accepting her as gay, lesbian, trans, whatever. Uh, other than her writing about it, she didn't really talk about it. The pronouns that she used were she and her. That's the pronouns that I use when I'm talking about her. Uh, my only problem is with any community or group, and this is not just about her, projecting their preferred pronouns onto other people. If we're going to properly respect people, then we need to respect how they want to be identified and how they depend ourselves. Our friend Robert Meyer Burnett, I joked with him about the editorial we. A lot of times when you own a business, you talk about yourself in the plural form. We're doing this, we're doing that. I don't know that I can necessarily do that in 2021 because people are going to get a misimpression of what it is I'm actually talking about, especially since they know that I'm gay. So, so I have a real problem with people projecting their opinions on other people. I have no problem with them espousing their opinions. Just don't attach your opinions to me or to other people, and we'll get along fine. So I started off my little rant with with mental health. Mental health is very important. I'll use myself as an example. I wasn't in New York September 11th, 2001. Uh, I have PTSD about the Twin Towers. I was in Long Beach, California the morning of September 11th, 2001. I have a very difficult time physically going to lower Manhattan because so much of my life is tied up at the corner of Liberty and West Streets. My father used to work there. I used to go there all the time. I used to work there.
Mm-hmm.
I used to uh, go to work in I think now it's called Brookfield Place, or uh, but it was the World Financial Center. Uh, and so I used to walk through the tunnels underneath the World Trade Center every single day. And I haven't been able to go to Lower Manhattan since I've been back in New York in 2008. So you never really understand how people are going to react to things mentally. Uh, all kinds of things trigger uh, mental health deficiencies, and we really need to be cognizant of what other people are going through, and how they react to things, and try and be as helpful as possible. And for those of us who have mental health problems, we need to seek assistance. So that's what I can say about that.
I think that's wise advice. And um, one thing I did want to say is that Paulie made so many contributions in so many areas that, and I mentioned this to you before, Mikey, but off not in this recording, but I'm guessing even in areas we may not even be aware of yet, because she's been so prolific in four areas that are impactful in our lives. Maybe even 50 years from now, we'll still be talking about something she did that now has shaped the way our society is. And I think honestly, her legacy is really just one of human rights and kindness, because this seems to me to be what the world that she hoped we would all be living in. And I think when we talk about we talk about Star Trek, and I'm sorry to bring up Star Trek, but we
That's all
talk about
right.
we talk about a society where we want everyone to fulfill their dreams, to reach the highest level that they can reach, and have a society where everyone respects everyone else and has different types of values where they care about one another. I think that's the society that Star Trek, gives us in a fictitious way. But I think that Paulie reached that level. I think that she got to that level because if your life has that much meaning to it, and you're helping others in this capacity, I think she gave it all she had. And it was a just a celebration of an incredible person who, I'm glad that she existed. And it's just so wonderful that we finally have this documentary about her. And to anybody who's watching this, please go ahead and watch the documentary on Amazon. It's called My Name is Paulie Murray, about one of the most incredible Americans during our lifetime. And we have so much to learn from her, and so much to be thankful for. Do you have any final words you'd like to say about the documentary, Mikey?
Yeah, just two things. Um, uh, I wrote down two words while I was watching this documentary. One is civility, which I always talk about, and the other one was nexus. She was at the nexus of history. So people may not be aware of all the different things that she was involved in and what have you. But sort of the way Forrest Gump was in a fictional way, uh, she was actually at the nexus of history at so many different things throughout her lifetime. And the other thing is uh, for people to get a little bit of understanding about my personal relationship with Aunt Paulie, uh, you can go to my opinion blog, which is at Mikeylito, just like it's spelled on the screen, .com. And I think it's pinned to the top, uh, my essay called Touched by History, um, where you get a little bit more of my personal feelings about my relationship with Aunt Paulie and myself. Uh, I think it was 37 days before she died. Uh, she married me and my ex-wife.
Oh,
I talk about that in the essay. Um, she was a very important person in my life, and that's why I'm so passionate about this documentary. I don't know which thing I'm more passionate about, this documentary or In the Heights. So
which we are going to review as well.
I'm looking forward to it. If
Mhm.
I can make a request,
Of course.
can we do it after West Side Story?
Yes, we can.
Because I'm thinking I want to compare. Okay, let me just put this. Let me put it this way. I, I don't know which adjective I should use, so I'm just going to use the one I would normally use. I'm putting the Latino community on notice. I'm interested in your reaction to West Side Story versus In the Heights, and I'm going to be watching. So
Well, we shall see. Um, we shall see the reactions. And I did want to thank you again for joining me on this review of My Life as Paulie Murray, the documentary that's available on Amazon right now. For those of you watching this, please go ahead, check out that documentary. I promise you, you will be amazed by Paulie Murray's accomplishments. And just it's a wonderful documentary, and it's definitely worth checking out.
thank you
And
very much for inviting me.
it's so wonderful to have you here, Mikeylito. And for everybody else who's watching, thank you for watching this video. And with that, remember everybody, please be kind.